On April 6, 2007, during the Good Friday procession in Puebla, Mexico, little Paloma Acosta, barely 7 years old, disappeared among the crowd of faithful accompanying the procession through the streets of the historic center. For 15 years, her family searched for answers without finding any. Until April 2022, when a photograph, long hidden in the personal archive of a local photographer, revealed a devastating truth. In that image, taken moments before her disappearance, it was clear to see who was walking right behind the girl, person who had been under their noses this entire time, actively participating in the searches, consoling the family, and hiding one of the darkest secrets a community could imagine. Before we continue with this disturbing story, if you appreciate real mysterious cases like this, please subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss any new cases. And let us know in the comments what country and city you're watching from. We're curious to know where our community is spread around the world. Now, let's discover how it all started. Puebla, Mexico's fourth largest city, is known for its deep Catholic tradition and colorful religious celebrations. The historic center, designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site, transforms each Holy Week into a stage of devotion where thousands of locals participate in processions dating back to the colonial era. The cobbled streets of the center, flanked by Baroque churches and 19th century mansions, resonate with chants and prayers during these holy days. In the Barrio de la Luz, located in the northern part of the historic center, the Acosta Serrano family lived. Paloma was the youngest of 3 siblings, a girl with light brown hair tied in 2 pigtails, big expressive eyes, and a smile that lit up her father's small blacksmith shop. Her mother, Beatriz Serrano, was a devout woman who never missed Sunday. Mass at the Parroquia de la Luz, a church built in 1740, which was the spiritual heart of their community. The Acosta family lived in a typical one-story Puebla house with a Talavera tiled facade and a small inner courtyard where Beatriz grew geraniums and herbs. They lived modestly, but with dignity. Nicholas worked repairing gates and fences for the mansions in the historic center, while Beatriz sold tamales on weekends at the El Pariao market. Their other children, Ruben, 14, and Alejandra, 10, helped with the household chores and looked after Paloma when their parents worked. The family had a well-established routine. Paloma attended Benito Juarez Primary School, located 6 blocks from their house, where she was in the 2nd grade. She was an average student, but stood out for her charisma and ease in making friends. Teachers described her as a cheerful, participative girl, although sometimes overly trusting of strangers. Her parents had taught her to greet all the neighbors in the neighborhood, a custom deeply rooted in that community where everyone had known each other for generations. Among the family's acquaintances was Esteban Quintero, a 38-year-old freelance photographer who documented religious and social events in Puebla. Esteban had moved to the Barrio de la Luz 3 years earlier, in 2004, renting a small apartment 2 blocks from the Acosta's home. He was a slender, single man with neatly combed black hair and a carefully trimmed mustache. He always wore white shirts and dark dress pants, giving an impression of cleanliness and professionalism. Quintero had earned the trust of the neighbors by photographing weddings, baptisms, and first communions at affordable prices. His work was meticulous, and he delivered printed photographs in manila envelopes with his personal seal. He had developed a particularly close relationship with the Acosta family, having photographed Paloma's baptism when she was 3 years old. And since then, the family had considered him almost a member of the community. The Good Friday procession in Puebla was part of a series of Holy Week processions, but it was the most solemn and attended. It began at 5 p.m. from the cathedral and traveled through the main streets of the historic center for about 3 hours. The procession included the image of the Santo Entierro, carried by members of various brotherhoods, accompanied by hundreds of faithful walking in silence or singing funeral hymns. Families organized into groups, carrying candles and flowers, while vendors took advantage of the crowd to sell water, candy, and religious items along the route. Good Friday of 2007 dawned cloudy in Puebla with a temperature of 18 degrees Celsius and light. Northeast winds. The bells of the cathedral had been ringing since 6 a.m., calling the faithful to participate in the Passion of Christ ceremonies. At the Acosta household, Beatrice had prepared a light lunch traditionally consumed on Good Friday: bean soup, capirotada, a sweet bread pudding, and hibiscus water. Paloma had woken up especially excited that day. Beatrice had bought her a new dress, a dark blue one with short sleeves and a small white collar embroidered with flowers. The girl had tied her characteristic pigtails, and her mother had put on her special occasion black patent leather shoes. At 2 p.m., when the family finished lunch, Paloma was already ready and eagerly waiting to leave for the center. At 4:30 p.m., the Acostas left their home heading to the meeting point at the Plaza de Armas. They walked down 16 de September Street, then took 5 de Mayo Street to reach the Zocalo. The streets were already full of people heading to the same destination, and the atmosphere was one of reverence and solemnity. Street vendors offered candles, rosaries, and religious images, while the bells of the nearby churches created a melancholic symphony that spread throughout the city. Upon arriving at Plaza de Armas, the Acostas met other neighbors from the Barrio de la Luz. Among them was Esteban Quintero, who wore his Nikon 80 camera, a professional model he had recently acquired to improve the quality of his work. Quintero greeted the family warmly and complimented Paloma on her new dress. "You look very beautiful, Palomita," he said, gently patting her head with a smile that her parents interpreted as genuinely paternal. The procession began promptly. At 5 p.m., the image of the Santo Entierro, elaborately decorated with white flowers and lily, emerged from the cathedral, carried by 8 men dressed in black. Behind them walked the Bishop of Puebla, followed by seminarians, members of various brotherhoods, and hundreds of faithful. The Acosta family had positioned themselves towards the middle of the procession, along with other neighbors they had known for years. Quintero walked near the family, discreetly taking photographs of the crowd, especially the children participating in the procession. On several occasions, he approached Paloma to take photos, promising her that he would give her copies the following week. The girl, used to being photographed by him, posed naturally and smiled despite the solemnity of the event. The procession continued down 16 de September Street, where the crowd grew denser as businesses closed, and their owners and employees joined the procession. The family walked in a line, Nicholas at the front, followed by Ruben, then Beatrice with Alejandra holding her hand, and finally Paloma, who insisted on walking alone because she considered herself too grown-up to hold hands. It was around 6:15 p.m. when the procession turned onto 3 North Street toward the Santo Domingo Church that Beatrice realized Paloma was no longer behind her. At first, she thought her daughter had stayed behind, admiring one of the floral decorations adorning the colonial house's balconies. She stopped and turned around, hoping to spot her in the crowd, but the small silhouette of her blue dress was nowhere to be found. "Nicholas!" She shouted, but her voice was lost in the chants and murmurs of the crowd. She began pushing through the people, asking if anyone had seen a 7-year-old girl with pigtails and a blue dress. Nicholas, realizing the situation, left Ruben and Alejandra with a familiar neighbor and began searching desperately through the crowd. Over the next 20 minutes, several neighbors joined the search. Quintero was one of the first to help, using his knowledge of the route and his height to scan over the heads of the people. "She must have gotten distracted with something and is standing on a corner," he said, trying to reassure Beatrice, who was already on the verge of hysteria. By 7 p.m., when the procession reached its final destination at the Santo Domingo church, Paloma still hadn't appeared. Nicholas immediately went to the nearest police station on 11 North Street to report her disappearance. The on-duty officer, Sergeant Mauricio Gallardo, took down the initial details and activated the protocol for missing minors. That night, municipal police officers from Puebla, along with volunteers from the Barrio de la Luz, combed the streets of the historic center. They used flashlights to check alleys, church courtyards, and any place where a frightened child might have taken refuge. The city's hospitals were contacted to verify if any unidentified minors had been admitted. The search continued until 2 a.m. on Saturday, with no results. During those crucial first hours, Quintero was particularly cooperative. He offered his photographs of the procession to the authorities, hoping that one of the images could provide a clue as to the exact moment of Paloma's disappearance. However, he explained that he had been mainly photographing the religious image and the more solemn moments of the event, so he didn't have many pictures of the crowd in the area where Paloma was lost. The days following Paloma's disappearance were devastating for the Acosta family. Beatriz developed severe depression, which kept her bedridden for weeks, unable to eat or sleep regularly. Nicholas was forced to temporarily close his blacksmith shop to dedicate himself entirely to searching for his daughter, which severely impacted the family's finances. Ruben and Alejandra, traumatized by the loss of their younger sister, began to experience academic problems and nightmares. The Puebla police, coordinated by Commander Efrain Cabrera, launched an exhaustive investigation that included interviews with over 200 people who had participated in the procession. The recordings from the few security cameras in the historic center in 2007 were reviewed, but most were located in banks and businesses that had remained closed during Good Friday. The available footage showed the procession from very general angles, making it impossible to identify specific individuals in the crowd. In the first few weeks, the investigation focused on three main theories. The first was the possibility that Paloma had gotten lost accidentally and was hiding somewhere in the city, possibly suffering from temporary amnesia caused by trauma. The second hypothesis considered the possibility of a kidnapping for extortion purposes, though this theory lost traction when no ransom demand was made in the first month. The third line of investigation, the most painful for the family, contemplated the possibility that the girl had fallen victim to a more serious crime. Commander Cabrera, a veteran police officer with 20 years of experience, had worked on similar cases before and was familiar with the discouraging statistics. When a minor disappears for more than 48 hours without a trace, the chances of finding them alive drastically decrease. However, he maintained an optimistic public profile to avoid demoralizing the family, while internally directing resources toward the search for a body. The Barrio de la Luz community mobilized in an extraordinary manner. Search brigades were organized to comb different areas of the city daily, from parks and medians to vacant lots on the city's outskirts. The Parroquia de la Luz became the informal operations center, where search activities were coordinated and reports of possible sightings were received. Esteban Quintero became one of the most dedicated volunteers. He used his car, a 2001 blue Volkswagen Jetta, to transport other volunteers to far-off search areas. His photography skills were used to create more effective search posters, and his willingness to work long hours without rest made him a respected figure within the search group. Beatriz commented several times that Quintero had been an angel sent by God during those difficult moments. Local media extensively covered the case during the first few weeks. Channel 2 of Puebla aired a special report on the disappearance, interviewing the family and showing images of the search brigades. The newspapers El Sol de Puebla and La Jornada de Orient published front-page articles with the most recent photograph of Paloma taken by Quintero during her birthday in January of that same year. However, as often happens in these cases, media interest began to wane after the first month. Other news events caught public attention, and the search for Paloma gradually ceased to be a priority on the front pages of the newspapers. This created a sense of abandonment for the family, who felt that the rest of the world had moved on while they remained trapped in an endless nightmare. During the second month, the police investigation expanded to include reviewing the backgrounds of people with a history of sexual offenses in Puebla and surrounding municipalities. Searches were conducted at the homes of individuals considered suspicious, but none of these actions yielded relevant evidence. Frustration began to affect the investigators as well, who were under pressure to solve a case that seemed to have no solid leads. By the third month of Paloma's disappearance, in July 2007, a moment of hope emerged when a woman reported seeing a girl who matched Paloma's description at a bus stop in the city of Tlaxcala, about 30 kilometers from Puebla. The supposed witness, a merchant named Norma Velasco, claimed that the girl was accompanied by an older man and appeared scared. An operation was immediately launched in Tlaxcala, but the search proved fruitless, and it was later determined that the report had been a case of mistaken identity. This false lead had a devastating impact on the Acosta family. Beatriz, who had briefly regained hope, suffered an emotional relapse even more severe than the previous one. Nicholas began showing signs of aggression, especially towards the authorities, whom he accused of incompetence. Tension in the household became unbearable, and in August 2007, Alejandra had to be sent to live temporarily with her maternal grandparents in the city of Atlixco. During this period, Quintero maintained a constant presence in the family's life. He visited the Acosta household at least 3 times a week, bringing prepared food when he noticed Beatriz wasn't cooking, or simply offering his silent company during the hardest nights. His camera was always present, documenting the search efforts to keep the case alive in the public's memory. He explained that the first anniversary of Paloma's disappearance, on April 6, 2008, was marked by a special mass at the Parroquia de La Luz. About 300 people attended, including neighbors, local authorities, and members of human rights organizations. Quintero photographed the entire ceremony, creating an album which he gave to the family as a testament that Paloma had not been forgotten. The following years brought a painful adaptation to a new normal. In 2009, Nicholas reopened his blacksmith shop, not out of emotional recovery, but out of financial necessity. The costs of the search had drained the family's savings, and debts were starting to pile up. Beatriz never fully returned to her commercial activities, limiting herself to occasionally selling tamales only when the financial situation became desperate. Ruben, who turned 18 in 2011, prematurely became the emotional support of the family. He had developed a serious protective personality, especially toward his sister Alejandra, who, at 14, showed signs of having assumed adult responsibilities. Both siblings had learned to live with the perpetual absence of Paloma, but they never stopped keeping hope alive that one day she would return. The police investigation was officially never closed, but in practice, it had become inactive after 2010. Commander Cabrera retired in 2009, and the new officer in charge of the case, Lieutenant Gustavo Palacios, inherited a thick file, but without any fresh leads to follow. Annual case reviews were limited to checking if any unidentified bodies had appeared that could correspond to Paloma, a routine that became increasingly mechanical and less hopeful. In 2012, 5 years after the disappearance, the family experienced another crisis moment when Alejandra, then 15, began showing self-destructive behaviors. She had started frequenting groups of troubled youth and showed total disinterest in her studies. Psychologists who evaluated her determined that she was experiencing complicated grief related to the unresolved loss of her sister. A year of intensive Family therapy was required to stabilize the situation. During these difficult years, Kenshiro continued to be a constant presence. His photography business had prospered, and in 2013, he opened a small studio in downtown Puebla specializing in event photography and family portraits. His professional success allowed him to discreetly offer financial assistance to the Acosta family, occasionally paying utility bills when he noticed they were facing particular difficulties. The photographer had developed a particularly close relationship with Beatrice, who considered him one of her few true friends. In the afternoons, when Nicholas's workshop was closed and the older siblings were occupied with their activities, Quintero would often visit the house to have coffee and listen to Beatrice talk about Paloma. These conversations always followed the same pattern. Beatrice would share specific memories of her missing daughter, and Quintero would console her, assuring her that one day they would have answers. What the family did not know was that Quintero had been meticulously documenting these years of searching. In his studio, he had archived thousands of photographs related to the case, including images of the search brigades, portraits of the family at different stages of grief, photographs of the places they had searched for Paloma, and even pictures of the annual commemorative masses. He explained this exhaustive documentation as part of an artistic project about the persistence of hope in situations of loss. In 2015, 8 years after the disappearance, Ruben married his high school girlfriend, Leticia Sandoval, in a small ceremony held at the Parroquia de la Luz. The wedding was bittersweet for the family. While they celebrated this happy moment, Paloma's absence was felt more deeply than ever. Quintero photographed the entire event free of charge, giving the family a professional album that included a blank page with a dedication, reserved for when Paloma returns and can see these photos. The following year, in 2016, Alejandra graduated from high school and announced her intention to study social work at the Universidad Autónoma de Puebla. Her motivation was clear. She wanted to specialize in cases of missing persons, to help other families going through the same situation. Nicholas and Beatrice were proud, but also worried that their daughter was choosing a career that would keep her permanently connected to the family's trauma. Over the years, by 2018, the family's routine had stabilized into a new melancholic normalcy. On Sundays after Mass, the family would visit the small altar they had built for Paloma in the municipal cemetery of Puebla. It wasn't a grave, but a cenotaph with a photograph of the girl surrounded by fresh flowers that Beatriz replaced weekly. Quintero often accompanied them on these visits, discreetly photographing these moments of family reflection. In 2019, when it had been 12 years since the disappearance, an investigative journalist from the Milenio newspaper took an interest in reviewing the case. The reporter, Osvaldo Figueroa, had been working on a series of articles about cold cases of missing persons in Puebla. His investigation included extensive interviews with the family, reviewing the police files, and consulting with criminologists specialized in missing minors. The resulting article, published in April 2019, sparked a small renewal of public interest. The case received a few calls with supposed new information, but all of them turned out to be false leads or already known details. However, the article had an unexpected effect. Several professional photographers from Puebla contacted Quintero to offer collaboration in documenting similar cases, recognizing the quality and sensitivity of his photographic work on the subject. By 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic dramatically altered everyone's life, including the Acosta families. Mobility restrictions temporarily suspended active searches and meetings of organizations for families of the missing. Nicholas had to close his workshop again for several months, and the family's financial situation became precarious. Quintero, whose photography business was also affected, continued to offer discreet financial support, justifying it as his way of keeping Paloma's memory alive during these difficult times. In 2021, When restrictions began to relax, Alejandra had graduated from university and started working for a non-governmental organization specializing in missing persons cases. Her first assigned case was that of a teenager who had gone missing in Cholula, and the experience connected her even more deeply with the pain her family had been living with for 14 years. It was during this period that Alejandra began to question certain aspects of her sister's disappearance that she had previously accepted without much reflection. As a trained professional in investigative techniques, she began mentally reviewing the details of that Good Friday afternoon in 2007. Some minor inconsistencies started to catch her attention, but she did not mention them to her family to avoid reopening wounds that seemed to finally be healing. On March 23, 2022, exactly 15 years after Paloma's disappearance, an event that seemed routine would trigger a series of revelations that would forever change the Acosta family's life. That day, Arturo Maldonado, a 68-year-old retiree who had worked for decades as an archivist at the Puebla Municipal Historical Archive, was organizing his personal belongings in preparation for moving into a nursing home. Maldonado had been an amateur photographer throughout his life, documenting social and religious events in Puebla since the 1980s. His photographic equipment had become obsolete with the advent of digital photography, and for years he had kept thousands of negatives and printed photographs stored in cardboard boxes in his basement. The task of reviewing and organizing this material had been repeatedly postponed, but the impending move made it unavoidable. As he reviewed a box marked Semana Santa 2000 to 2010, Maldonado found several rolls of film he had never developed. Among them was an entire roll he had taken during the Good Friday procession of 2007. He vaguely remembered having trouble with his camera that day and decided not to develop those photographs, assuming they had turned out badly. Maldonado took the rolls to a photographic lab specializing in analog film development, one of the few still operating in Puebla. The technician, a young man named Damian Lara, who had developed a passion for traditional photographic processes, was excited about the project of developing such old material and committed to doing his best to recover the images. Maldonado received the developed photographs. Upon reviewing them, he immediately realized he had captured something extraordinary, a complete sequence of the Good Friday procession of 2007, including detailed images of the crowd at different moments and locations. The quality was better than expected, and many people were clearly identifiable in the photographs. One image in particular caught Maldonado's attention. It showed a section of the procession on 3 North Street, exactly in the area where, as he remembered reading in the newspapers years earlier, a little girl had gone missing. In the foreground was a family walking in a line, and behind them, clearly visible, was a young girl with pigtails and a navy blue dress. What shocked him the most was seeing that right behind the girl was a man with a camera hanging from his neck, with his hand resting on the girl's shoulder. Maldonado, who had followed the case of Paloma Acosta through the media for years, immediately recognized the girl from the photographs that had been published in the newspapers. He also recognized the man. It was Esteban Quintero, the photographer who had assisted in the searches, and whose image had appeared in several reports about the case as an example of community solidarity. The photograph was automatically time-stamped by the camera, April 6, 2007, 18:14 hours. The exact moment corresponded to the period during which Paloma had disappeared. According to the police reports that Maldonado recalled reading, the implication was disturbing. Quintero had been physically beside the girl moments before her disappearance, a detail that had apparently never been mentioned in the investigations. Maldonado spent the night awake, debating with himself about what to do with this information. On the one hand, he understood that a photograph alone did not constitute evidence of a crime. and there could be innocent explanations for the proximity between Quintero and Paloma. On the other hand, he knew that this image could be the missing piece of information the authorities and the family had been searching for over 15 years. Ultimately, he decided to contact the police. On March 27, 2022, Maldonado went to the offices of the Attorney General's Office of the State of Puebla and requested to speak with the person responsible for the Paloma Acosta case. He was attended by prosecutor Claudia Rangel, who had taken on the review of cold cases in 2021 as part of a new governmental initiative to solve unsolved crimes. When Maldonado showed the photograph to prosecutor Rangel, the reaction was immediate. The image clearly showed a physical interaction between Quintero and Paloma that had not been reported during the original investigation. Rangel immediately ordered a complete review of the case file and requested that Quintero be located and questioned about this new evidence. The search for Quintero revealed that the photographer had closed his studio in January 2022 and had stopped renewing the lease on his apartment. His neighbors reported that he had mentioned plans to move to another city, but had not kept in contact after his departure. This sudden disappearance, right before the 50th anniversary of the case, added a sinister dimension to the new evidence. Prosecutor Claudia Rangel decided not to immediately inform the Acosta family about the discovery of the photograph. Her experience with sensitive cases told her that it was crucial to gather more information before raising expectations or causing further trauma to a family that had already suffered immensely. Instead, she ordered a discreet investigation into the current whereabouts of Esteban Quintero and a thorough review of his life and activities over the last 15 years. The investigation into Quintero uncovered disturbing information. Financial records showed that he had maintained a standard of living higher than what his declared income as a photographer should have allowed. Additionally, he had made several trips outside the state of Puebla in the years following Paloma's disappearance. These trips were justified as photographic expeditions, but there was no evidence of corresponding commercial work. Even more unsettling, the review of his history revealed that he had been briefly investigated in 2003 in the city of Querétaro for a report of inappropriate behavior towards minors in a public park. The case had been closed due to lack of evidence, but the initial report described an individual who matched Quintero's physical characteristics, photographing children without their parents' permission. On April 15, 2022, investigators located Quintero in the city of San Luis Potosi, where he had settled under his real name, but had not kept in contact with anyone from Puebla. He had rented a small apartment in a popular neighborhood and had restarted his photography business, once again specializing in family events and child portraits. When the agents arrived at his home to question him, Quintero showed evident signs of nervousness. His first reaction was to specifically ask whether the visit was related to the case of the missing girl from Puebla, a question that the investigators found revealing, considering they hadn't mentioned the reason for their visit. During the preliminary interrogation, Quintero admitted remembering Paloma Acosta and confirmed that he had participated in the searches after her disappearance. However, when shown the photograph by Maldonado, his reaction was unexpected. Instead of surprise or confusion, he showed what the investigators described as a resigned relief, as if he had been waiting for this moment for years. "I knew that one day a photo would show up," were his first words after seeing the image. This spontaneous statement convinced the investigators that Quintero had crucial information about Paloma's disappearance, which he had kept hidden. For a decade and a half, Quintero was transferred to Puebla for a formal interrogation. During the first 6 hours of questioning, he maintained a version of events that was technically consistent with his known participation in the searches, but he evaded specific questions about his physical proximity to Paloma during the procession. Investigators noted that his responses seemed to have been rehearsed mentally for years. The turning point came when Prosecutor Rangel informed him that they had found additional evidence at his former photography studio. The new owners of the premises had discovered a box of materials that Quintero had left behind in the basement. Among these materials were negatives of photographs he had never developed, including images of Paloma taken without the family's knowledge in the months leading up to her disappearance. These photographs showed the girl in various everyday situations, walking to school, playing in her yard, buying candy at a local store. The quality and angle of the images suggested they had been taken from hiding spots or considerable distances, indicating a pattern of surveillance that had preceded the disappearance. Confronted with this evidence, Quintero remained silent for nearly an hour. The investigators interpreted this silence as a mental evaluation process. He was deciding whether to continue denying, or if the moment had come to reveal the truth he had kept for 15 years. Finally, at 11:30 p.m. on April 17, 2022, Esteban Quintero asked to speak with Prosecutor Rangel. He told her that he was willing to make a full confession, but with one condition. He wanted to explain personally to the Acosta family what had happened the day Paloma disappeared. According to him, he owed it to Beatriz after all these years of lies. Quintero's confession was scheduled for April 20, 2022, at the offices of the Attorney General's Office of the State of Puebla. The Acosta family was notified 3 days in advance, receiving the news that there had been significant developments in the case requiring their presence. During those 3 days of waiting, Nicholas, Beatriz, Ruben, and Alejandra experienced a mix of hope and terror, unsure if they would finally receive the answers they had been searching for over the past decade and a half. The meeting took place in a conference room specially prepared with psychological support staff present. Quintero had requested that no handcuffs be used during his statement, and that he be allowed to sit in front of the family without the separation of a table. Prosecutor Rangel agreed to these conditions, considering that the voluntary cooperation of the suspect was more valuable than maintaining strict security protocols. When Quintero entered the room, the contrast with the man the family had known for 15 years was evident. He had lost weight, his hair was completely gray, and his hands were visibly trembling. He avoided initial eye contact with the family, but when he finally lifted his gaze toward Beatriz, his eyes filled with tears. Beatriz started with a broken voice. For 15 years I've lived every day knowing that I was lying to you. Every time I comforted you, every time I told you we had to keep hoping, every time I photographed the searches, I knew exactly where Paloma was. The silence in the room was absolute. Beatriz clung to Nicholas' arm, while Alejandra and Ruben mentally prepared themselves to hear the truth they had feared for years. Quintero explained that his obsession with Paloma had begun when he photographed her baptism in 2004. There was something about her that fascinated me, he confessed. Her spontaneity, her smile, the way she trusted everyone. I started photographing her secretly, following her in her daily routines. It wasn't sexual at first. It was more like an artistic compulsion, but over time, it became an obsession. On the morning of Good Friday, 2007, Quintero had made the decision to take Paloma away from all the pain in the world. In his disturbed mind, he had rationalized that he was protecting her from the dangers of growing up in an imperfect world. During the procession, he waited for the perfect moment when the crowd was denser and the families were more distracted by the solemnity of the event. When I approached her on 3 North Street, Quintero continued, I told her that her mother had asked me to take her to a special place to take some photos. Paloma trusted me because she knew me, because I had been in her house so many times. I took her hand and led her out of the procession through a side alley I had previously explored. Quintero's plan had been to take Paloma to a secluded cabin he had rented in the municipality of Zacatlán, about 2 hours from Puebla. His intention, as he explained, was to create a perfect world where Paloma could live without the complications and dangers of society. He had prepared the cabin for weeks, buying toys, clothes, and everything he thought a 7-year-old girl might need. However, during the trip to Zacatlán, Paloma began to cry and begged to return to her family. She started to realize something was wrong, Quintero admitted. She became hysterical. She screamed that she wanted her mom. I tried to calm her down. I told her we were going to a beautiful place, but she kept crying. What followed was the most difficult part of his confession. Quintero explained that in his desperation to silence Paloma's cries, he had placed his hand over the girl's mouth to prevent other drivers from hearing. I didn't want to hurt her, he repeated constantly. I just wanted her to stop crying so I could explain to her that everything was going to be okay. But Paloma had struggled fiercely, and in the confusion of the struggle inside the car, Quintero had applied too much pressure for too long. When I realized what had happened, it was too late. She lost consciousness and didn't respond to my attempts to revive her. She died in my arms, Quintero confessed between sobs. It wasn't what I wanted. I just wanted to protect her, create a place where she could be happy forever, but I killed her by accident when I tried to make her stop crying. After Paloma's accidental death, Quintero went into shock. He drove aimlessly for hours with the child's body in the back seat of his car, unable to process what had happened. He finally decided to bury her in a place he considered beautiful and peaceful, a small clearing in the forest near Zacatlán, by a stream where he had taken landscape photos in the past. I buried her in her blue dress, he explained. I placed her favorite flowers, the ones her mom grew in the yard. I took photos of the place so I could come back and visit her. During all these years, Quintero had gone there every month to bring fresh flowers and talk to her. The most disturbing revelation came at the end. Quintero explained that his participation in the searches had been a way for him to stay close to Paloma and control the information that might lead authorities to him. Every time I comforted Beatrice, every time I helped with the search brigades, I was fulfilling my psychological need to stay connected both with the victim and with the pain I had caused. Beatrice addressed him directly. I know you'll never be able to forgive me. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that Paloma didn't suffer beyond those first moments of confusion, and that during all these years, she was never alone. I was there, taking care of her, talking to her, making sure the place where she rests was always beautiful. Quintero's confession was corroborated when authorities located the exact spot where he had buried Paloma. On April 25, 2022, a team of forensic anthropologists and criminal experts went to the forest near Zacatlán, following the detailed directions provided by Quintero. They indeed found the remains of the girl buried at a depth of about 1.5 meters, exactly where he had confessed. The remains were exhumed following the appropriate forensic protocol and transferred to the facilities of the Forensic Medical Service in Puebla for definitive identification studies. Although the passage of time had significantly affected the remains, the identity was confirmed through comparative dental analysis with the records the family had provided years earlier. Along with the remains, fragments of the navy blue dress Paloma had worn the day of her disappearance were found, as well as the black patent leather shoes Beatrice vividly remembered. Several items that Quintero had been bringing to the site during his monthly visits were also located: small artificial flowers, a rag doll, and laminated photographs of Paloma that he had taken during the years prior to the tragedy. The physical evidence confirmed the version of events Quintero had narrated. Forensic studies found no signs of sexual violence or torture, supporting his claim that the death had been accidental during his attempt to silence the child. However, this did not lessen the legal severity of his actions. He had committed aggravated kidnapping, manslaughter, and evidence concealment over 15 years. For the Acosta family, the confirmation of Paloma's death brought a complex mix of relief and renewed pain. On the one hand, they finally had the answers they had been seeking for over a decade and a half, and they could give their daughter a proper burial. On the other hand, they were confronted with the reality that they had spent 15 years trusting and receiving comfort from the very person who had destroyed their lives. Beatrice experienced what psychologists described as delayed grief. For 15 years, she had kept the hope alive that Paloma would return, and now she had to process not only the definitive loss of her daughter, but also the massive betrayal by someone she had considered a guardian angel. "It feels like I lost Paloma twice," she confessed during one of her therapy sessions. "Once when she disappeared, and again when I found out the truth." Nicholas reacted with deep anger, requiring intensive therapeutic intervention. For weeks, he expressed a desire for vengeance against Quintero and had to be physically restrained on several occasions when he expressed his intent to take justice into his own hands. The entire family underwent specialized family therapy for trauma to help them process this devastating revelation. Alejandra, with her professional background in social work, was the one who best managed to contextualize the situation from a clinical perspective. Her understanding of predator behavior patterns helped her understand how Quintero had manipulated her family for years. "He was a perfect predator," she explained to her parents. "Not only did he take Paloma from us, but he turned our pain into a source of satisfaction for him." On May 15, 2022, Paloma Acosta finally received the burial her family had dreamed of giving her for 15 years. The ceremony took place at the municipal cemetery in Puebla, with hundreds of people who had participated in the searches over the years in attendance. The service was officiated by the priest of the Church of the Light, who had known Paloma since her baptism. Esteban Quintero was sentenced to 35 years in prison for the crimes of aggravated kidnapping, manslaughter, and evidence concealment. During the trial, his lawyers argued that he suffered from mental disorders that influenced his actions. But psychiatric experts determined that, although he exhibited patterns of obsessive-compulsive behavior and pedophilic tendencies, he had maintained enough capacity for discernment to be considered criminally responsible. In a controversial decision, Quintero requested to address the family directly during the sentencing hearing. Prosecutor Rangel agreed, considering that it might provide some form of closure for the ACOs. As dot in his final statement, Quintero reiterated that his intention had never been to hurt Paloma, but acknowledged that his actions had been unforgivable and unjustifiable. He ended by asking that his sentence be as severe as possible, as he felt he deserved to pay for every day of suffering he had caused the family. 1 year after the truth was discovered, in April 2023, the Acosta family made the decision to transform their pain into constructive action. They established the Paloma Acosta Foundation, dedicated to supporting families of missing persons and promoting more effective immediate search protocols. Alejandra left her previous job to run the foundation full-time, using her professional and personal experience to help other families. The foundation implemented an innovative citizen search program that included training volunteers in basic investigative techniques and coordinating with authorities. They also developed an immediate psychological support protocol for families who had just reported a disappearance. Based on the lessons learned from their own traumatic experience, Beatrice became an unexpected activist, speaking at conferences and universities about the importance of early detection of predatory behaviors in small communities. Her main message was that community trust should not blind us to signs of danger, and that families should teach their children to distinguish between appropriate and inappropriate closeness, even with familiar adults. The case of Paloma Acosta became a reference study in forensic criminology on how perpetrators can manipulate their victims' pain to avoid detection. Quintero's behavior pattern, actively inserting himself into the search for his own victim, was documented as a cover-up technique that could be applied to the investigation of other similar cases out in the forest near Zacatlán. The place where Paloma had been buried was turned into a small memorial with the cooperation of local authorities. The family visits the site every April 6th, but now as a peaceful place where they can talk to Paloma without the contaminating presence of her killer, in Nicholas' words. During the healing process, the family discovered that forgiveness was not necessary to move forward. "I don't have to forgive Quintero to live in peace," Beatriz explained in an interview in 2024. "What I have to do is honor Paloma's memory by helping other children and families. That's my way of making sure her life had meaning beyond the pain caused by her death." Today, Paloma's room in the family home remains exactly as it was in 2007, but no longer as a sanctuary of pain, rather as a reminder of the joy she brought to their lives during her 7 years. The photographs Quintero had taken of the family during the years of search were ceremonially destroyed, but the images from before the tragedy were preserved as a testament to genuine moments of family happiness. The story of Paloma Acosta became a full yet necessary reminder that evil often presents itself disguised as goodness, and that true justice sometimes requires decades to manifest. For her family, the discovery of the truth did not bring Paloma back, but it allowed them to finally begin living again, carrying her memory as a guiding light in their work to protect other children from similar fates. This case shows us how the most dangerous predators are those who insert themselves into our communities, earning our trust and using our own pain as a shield to avoid suspicion. The Acosta family spent 15 years receiving comfort from the same person who had destroyed their lives, a psychological manipulation that demonstrates the ability of some individuals to maintain facades of normality for decades. What do you think of this story? Could you identify warning signs in Quintero's behavior throughout the narrative? Do you think his active participation in the searches should have raised suspicion earlier? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this investigation impacted you, and you want to continue learning about cases that teach us about human nature and the importance of protecting the most vulnerable, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Give this video a like if you believe stories like Paloma Acosta's should be told to raise awareness about these issues. And share it with people who might benefit from learning the lessons this tragedy teaches about trust, community, and child protection.